The last time anyone in the galaxy had spoken the word human without lowering their voice, 50,000 years had not yet passed. Now it was a word wrapped in myth, warning, and fear. A word carved into hulls of dead ships that drifted at the edge of a border no fleet had dared to cross. Supreme Commander Thrax was about to change that. From the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer of Stars, he watched 6,000 warships fall into formation behind him like a wall of black iron blotting out the light of distant suns. The Qatari Dominion had never lost a war in 3 centuries of conquest. 112 worlds bowed to its banners. Thrax himself had never tasted defeat. Not once, not in 40 years of campaigns that stretched from the Ember Reaches to the Silent Rim. He had built his reputation on a single unshakable principle. Hesitation kills empires, and the Dominion did not hesitate. Ahead of his fleet lay the Quarantine Line, an invisible boundary in space that every civilization in the galaxy treated like the edge of the world. Beyond it, human territory. Nobody the Dominion had ever spoken with could say what waited there. Only that ships which crossed the line simply never returned. No wreckage, no distress signals, no survivors, just silence, stretching back 50,000 years. Thrax found the silence insulting. Sensors showed no defensive presence, reported his tactical officer, a sharp-eyed Qatari named Vesa. No fleets, no orbital platforms, no weapon signatures of any kind. Then they have grown weak, Thrax said. Or they never existed at all, just a ghost story other species use to justify their own cowardice. He gave the order. 6,000 ships crossed the Quarantine Line together, and for the first time in 50,000 years, the ancient silence broke. Turning point 1. What they found on the other side was nothing like an empire preparing for war. Thrax's fleet drifted past world after world, some green and alive, others barren, and every single one was empty of cities, empty of fleets, empty of any visible sign of the civilization that supposedly commanded them. Instead, towering black monuments rose from the surface of a dozen planets. Structures too smooth and too vast had been built by any technology the Dominion understood. Vesa's sensors couldn't even determine what they were made of. "This isn't a home world," Vesa murmured, staring at the readouts. "This is a graveyard." Thrax refused to be unsettled. He ordered a boarding team to one of the monuments on the nearest world, and found not weapons, not treasure, but warnings. Symbols repeated across every surface, in scripts belonging to a dozen extinct languages, all translated by the ship's linguistic array into the same phrase, over and over. "Do not awaken what sleeps beyond." Superstition, Thrax told his officers, though something in his chest tightened as he said it. 3 hours deeper into human space, the fleet's communications array lit up with an incoming transmission, the first sign of intelligent contact since crossing the border. No visual, no face, just a voice, calm and even, speaking perfect Qatari as though it had rehearsed the language for centuries. "Commander Thrax," the voice said, "you have crossed a line that exists for a reason older than your civilization. Turn your fleet around. This is the only warning you will receive." Vesa traced the signal's origin and went pale. "Commander, this isn't coming from a ship. It isn't coming from a planet. It's coming from everywhere, from the space around us." Thrax stood from his command chair, sensing for the first time in 40 years something he refused to name: doubt. He buried it beneath decades of pride. No voice without a face, without a fleet, without a single visible weapon, was going to turn the supreme commander of the Qatari Dominion away from the greatest conquest of his career. "This is Supreme Commander Thrax of the Qatari Dominion," he answered. "We do not retreat from ghosts. Identify your fleet or stand down." The voice did not waver. "There is no fleet. There is only a choice. You are making the wrong one." Thrax's answer was immediate and absolute. He raised his hand, and across 6,000 warships, weapons batteries powered to full charge in perfect unison, a display of coordinated force that had broken the will of 100 enemies before a single shot was fired. It always worked. Fear always came first, then surrender. "Illuminate every world in this system," Thrax ordered. "Let them see what refusing the Dominion cost them." Vesa hesitated for the first time in her career. "Commander," sensors still show nothing. No shields, no defense grid, no counterfleet. "If we fire, And there truly is nothing here to stop us. We conquer the most feared territory in galactic history, without losing a single ship. But if the legends are even partly true, legends do not stop cannons, Thrax said. Fire. 6,000 warships unleashed a barrage bright enough to be seen from neighboring star systems. And for one triumphant second, Thrax believed he had just conquered the one territory that had terrified the galaxy for 50,000 years. Then the light of his own weapon's fire began to bend, not fade, not scatter, but bend, curving backward through space as though reality itself had decided the attack had never happened. Thrax's triumph collapsed into confusion, and confusion collapsed into something far colder as the bridge lights flickered and every screen on the Devourer of Stars went white. Somewhere beyond the edge of Qatari sensors, humanity had finally decided to answer. The white light lasted 4 seconds. To Thrax, it felt like a lifetime. When his vision cleared, the tactical display looked wrong. Not damaged, not offline, but rewritten, showing readings that violated everything he understood about physics. 300 warships at the front of his formation were simply gone, not destroyed, not vaporized, gone, as if they had never been built, their positions in formation now occupied by empty space and drifting debris that wasn't debris at all. It was dust, fine as ash, the exact mass a battleship should have left behind if every atom of it had aged 10,000 years in a single instant. Status report, Thrax barked, though his voice had lost its certainty. Vesa, what happened to the third wing? Vesa's hands trembled over her console. They're not destroyed, Commander. Their hulls decayed. Structurally, chemically, it's like watching 10 millennia of entropy happen in 4 seconds. But there's no wreckage pattern consistent with any weapon we've ever recorded. There's no weapon signature at all. Before Thrax could respond, new readings began flooding every monitor on the bridge. Ships throughout his formation were vanishing in different ways, some crumbling to dust like the third wing, others simply blinking out of existence with no trace whatsoever, and a disturbing few frozen mid-explosion, their weapons fire, and debris hanging motionless in space, as if time itself had stopped flowing around them. They're not dying, Vesa said, horror creeping into her voice as she cross-referenced the data. Commander, look at the frozen ships. They're crews, I'm reading life signs. Suspended but alive. They're not killing us. They're sorting us. Thrax gripped the arms of his command chair. In 40 years of warfare, he had faced enemies who slaughtered, enemies who tortured, enemies who burned entire worlds rather than surrender them. He had never faced an enemy who could unmake a warship without firing a shot and had chosen, apparently, not to kill the crew inside it. This is not possible, he said quietly. Nothing rewrites matter without energy. Nothing rewrites time without paradox. This is not a weapon. This is a correction, the voice said, returning to every speaker on the bridge simultaneously. Still calm, still without a trace of malice. You were warned, Commander Thrax. What is happening to your fleet is not an attack. It is a correction field, a technology that allows us to alter local physical law within a defined boundary. Your ships are not being destroyed. They are being preserved until this conflict ends. Thrax's second-in-command, a battle-scarred officer named Corrin, who had served through 11 campaigns, made a decision that changed the shape of the encounter. Believing the correction to be some form of long-range disabling weapon rather than a fundamental alteration of reality, he ordered the remaining ships of the second wing to charge directly at the source of the transmission, guns blazing, in a desperate attempt to close the distance and force conventional battle the Dominion could win. It was, Thrax would later admit, an act of genuine courage. It made no difference at all. The moment Corrin's ships crossed an invisible threshold in space, the same event unfolded. Hulls aging, dissolving, freezing. Except this time, Thrax watched it happen close enough to see individual ships change on his own viewport rather than through sensor data. He watched the Ashwind, a ship he had personally commanded a decade earlier, crumble into fine gray dust that drifted apart in total silence, its 900 crew members suspended somewhere within that dust, alive, waiting, unreachable. Corrin's voice crackled over comms his final transmission before his own ship joined the others. Commander, they're not fighting us. I don't think they even see this as a war. Then his channel, 2, went silent, not destroyed. Thrax understood now with a chill he could not suppress, but paused. with 4,000 of his original 6,000 ships still combat capable. Thrax made a decision that surprised his own crew. He ordered a full ceasefire. Not out of fear, he told himself, but out of the same tactical logic that had made him undefeated for 40 years. A commander who could not understand his enemy's weapon could not defeat it, and a commander who could not win should not waste his remaining forces proving it. Cease fire across all ships, he ordered. Hold position. Do not advance. The dissolving stopped instantly, as though the field itself had been listening for exactly that command. A wise choice, the voice said, and for the first time, something in its tone shifted. Not triumph, not mockery, but what Thrax could only describe as relief. Commander Thrax, you have just made the first correct decision of this encounter. I would like to speak with you directly, not as an enemy, as someone who needs you to understand what you nearly woke up. Thrax stared at the drifting dust cloud that had once been the Ashwind, at the frozen wreckage suspended like sculptures throughout the system, and felt the foundation of everything he believed about strength, about victory, about the natural order of conquest, begin to crack beneath him. I'm listening, he said. What came next would end his career as a conqueror, and begin something he never could have imagined. The voice asked for a single Qatari envoy to be transported to a location it designated. No ship, no weapons, no escort. Every instinct honed across 40 years of warfare told Thrax this was madness. Every instinct honed across the last 20 minutes told him refusing was worse. He went himself. The transport arrived not aboard a human vessel, but inside what could only be described as a structure floating in open space, a chamber of impossible light. Walls that seemed to be made of captured starlight folded into geometric patterns his mind struggled to hold on to. There were no visible controls, no crew, no signs of the vast industrial machinery an empire capable of rewriting physics should have required. And there, waiting for him, stood a single human. She was smaller than Thrax expected, unarmed, dressed simply, with none of the ceremonial armor or display of rank the Dominion used to signal authority. Her name, she said, was Director Ilsamar, and she held no military title at all, because humanity, she explained, had not fought a war in over 60,000 years. Thrax laughed, an involuntary, disbelieving sound. Your species just unmade a third of my fleet without firing a weapon. You expect me to believe you don't fight wars. We didn't fight yours, Ilson said. We prevented it. There's a difference, Commander, and it's the most important difference in this galaxy. She gestured, and the chamber around them shifted, walls dissolving into a projected starfield showing the edge of known space, and beyond it, a region of absolute, featureless black that made Thrax's stomach turn simply to look at. 60,000 years ago, humanity discovered something at the edge of the galaxy, Ilson continued. Not a species, not an empire, something older than either, an intelligence, if you can call it that, which exists to consume. Stars, civilizations, the physical laws that hold matter together. We call the hollow. It does not negotiate, does not communicate, does not stop. It only grows. Thrax's arrogance faltered as Ilson showed him the historical record. Star systems had existed in ancient astronomical charts and existed nowhere in the present sky. Entire regions of galaxy that had simply gone dark over tens of thousands of years, their light snuffed out not by natural stellar death, but by something spreading through them like rot through wood. Dozens of ancient civilizations, predecessors to every species now alive in the galaxy, had encountered the hollow directly. None of them survived contact. We were the last, Ilson said quietly, the last species to encounter it and live to build a defense. And we discovered something the others never had time to learn, that the hollow cannot be fought with weapons. It consumes energy, matter, force. Every gun, every bomb, every fleet you could throw at it only feeds it faster. Then how do you stop something that cannot be fought? You don't fight it, Ilson said. You contain it. We spent 10,000 years developing the correction field, not as a weapon, but as a boundary technology capable of holding back something that exists outside normal physical law by rewriting the rules of the space around it. We built the barrier across the edge of the galaxy, sealing the hollow inside it, and then we built the quarantine line, sealing ourselves around the barrier, because maintaining it requires technology so dangerous that any civilization capable of misusing it could accidentally tear the barrier open instead. Thrax finally understood, with the sick clarity of a man realizing he'd spent his entire career mistaking a locked door for an empty room. "The quarantine line was never meant to keep us out of your territory," he said slowly. "It was meant to keep us away from the only thing standing between this galaxy and complete annihilation." "Yes," Ilson said. "And when 6,000 warships crossed that line firing weapons at will, Commander, you came within an estimated 11% of destabilizing a containment field that has held for 60,000 years. Not because your fleet was powerful enough to threaten it directly, but because the correction field requires perfect calibration, and every unauthorized discharge of energy within its operational radius creates a fluctuation. Enough fluctuations, and the barrier weakens. Enough weakening, and the Hollow notices the door is unlocked." Thrax looked at the frozen dust cloud that had once been the Ashwind, understanding now that it hadn't been an act of aggression at all. It had been an act of desperate triage, humanity sacrificing its ship's physical coherence to instantly cancel out the destabilizing energy its weapons had introduced, all while keeping every crew member alive rather than simply annihilating the threat outright. "You could have killed us all in an instant," Thrax said. "Why didn't you?" Ilson's expression, for the first time, showed something like sorrow. "Because we have spent 60,000 years learning the difference between defending the galaxy and destroying pieces of it out of fear. If we start killing every civilization that doesn't understand what we're protecting, Commander, we become exactly the kind of threat we were built to prevent. That is why we isolated ourselves instead of ruling this galaxy as gods. That is the choice we made, the same choice we're offering you now." For the first time in 40 years, Supreme Commander Thrax had no idea what to say. Thrax returned to the Devourer of Stars a different man than the one who had left it, though his officers didn't yet understand why. He ordered the fleet to hold position at the edge of human territory, not retreating, not advancing, while he composed a report to the Dominion's ruling council, the Qatari High Assembly, describing everything Ilson had shown him. The response came faster than he expected. It was not the response he wanted. High Assembly Chancellor Vorin, a political figure who had never commanded a warship in his life, but controlled the Dominion's military funding with absolute authority, dismissed Thrax's report within hours of receiving it. "Supreme Commander," Vorin's transmission read, in the clipped tone of a man addressing a subordinate rather than the Dominion's most celebrated military mind, "you have lost a third of your fleet to an enemy weapon and returned with a fantasy story about ancient monsters to explain your failure. The Assembly does not accept myths as a substitute for military accountability. You will resume the offensive and secure Qatari dominance over this territory, or you will be relieved of command and replaced by an officer willing to complete the mission." Thrax stared at the message in disbelief. 40 years of unbroken victory, and the first time he brought home the truth instead of conquest. His own government called him a liar. "They think I've gone soft," Thrax said to Vesa, who had remained loyally at his side through the entire encounter. "They think the humans frightened an old commander into fabricating excuses." "Then show them," Vesa said. "Send them the sensor data. Send them the recordings of the correction field. Send them everything." He did. It made no difference. Within a day, the High Assembly's own scientific division, staffed by analysts who had never left Dominion space, let alone witnessed the correction field firsthand, issued a formal statement declaring the data inconclusive and possibly fabricated by enemy propaganda technology. The Assembly's true motivation, Thrax realized with growing bitterness, was far simpler than skepticism. An empire built on the myth of invincibility could not survive publicly admitting that its supreme commander had been stopped without a single enemy casualty. 3 days later, Chancellor Vorin made his move. A relief fleet of 2,000 additional warships arrived at the quarantine line under the command of a younger, more politically ambitious officer named Kessick, a man whose loyalty to the Assembly's narrative exceeded his understanding of what he was about to face. Kessick's orders were explicit. Relieve Thrax of command if necessary, and resume full-scale offensive operations against human territory to restore the Dominion's honor. Thrax intercepted Kessick's fleet before it had crossed the line, placing his own ships battered, but still numbering for 1,000, directly in its path. "Stand down, Commander Thrax," Kessick's transmission demanded. "By order of the High Assembly, you are relieved of command effective immediately." "You have not seen what I have seen," Thrax replied. If you cross that line and fire a single weapon, you will not be fighting an enemy fleet. You will be gambling with the survival of every living thing in this galaxy, including your own family on Cataris Prime. I built my career on knowing when a fight could be won. This cannot be won. It can only be lost by everyone, all at once. Keswick hesitated, but political ambition outweighed caution. He ordered his fleet to advance around Thrax's blockade. What happened next was not the battle Keswick expected. Thrax, faced with a choice between obeying an order that could doom the galaxy and defying the only government he had ever served, made the most difficult decision of his 40-year career. He ordered his own loyal fleet to open fire, not on the humans, but on Keswick's incoming ships, disabling their weapon systems and engine arrays before they could cross the quarantine line themselves. It was, by Dominion law, an act of outright treason. Vesa stared at him from the tactical station, stunned. "Commander, you just fired on Dominion forces to protect the humans who nearly destroyed a third of our fleet." "I fired on Dominion forces to protect everyone," Thrax said, watching Keswick's disabled ships drift to a halt at the very edge of the line. "Including the fools in that fleet, who don't yet understand what they almost woke up. I have spent my life believing that strength means never yielding. I was wrong, Vesa. Sometimes strength means being the only one willing to stand between your own people and their own worst mistake." As Keswick's furious, humiliated voice crackled over comms demanding Thrax's immediate arrest, a new transmission arrived. Not from the Dominion, but from Ilsamar, who had been monitoring the entire confrontation from beyond the line. "Commander Thrax," she said, "you just risked everything to protect a species that attacked you. That is exactly the choice we hoped you would make. It's time the rest of your galaxy heard the truth, not from us, but from you." Word of Thrax's mutiny spread through Dominion space faster than any battle report in the Empire's history. By the time his flagship limped back toward Cataris Prime, trailed by Keswick's disabled fleet and a growing storm of political outrage, half the Assembly was calling for his execution, and the other half was demanding to know why a man with 40 years of unbroken loyalty had suddenly turned his weapons on his own people. Thrax gave them an answer no one expected. He requested a public hearing before the full High Assembly, broadcast openly across every world in the Dominion, and invited Ilsamar to attend as a witness. Chancellor Vorin tried to block the broadcast entirely, fearing what an unfiltered account of the correction field and the Hollow might do to public confidence in the Dominion's military supremacy. But Thrax, still technically supreme commander despite his court-martial status, had spent 40 years earning the loyalty of soldiers across 112 worlds, soldiers who now refused, in unprecedented numbers, to enforce Vorin's order for a media blackout. Faced with a very real possibility of open unrest among his own military, Vorin backed down, allowing the hearing to proceed under intense public scrutiny. Billions across the Dominion watched as Ilsamar stood before the Assembly and calmly, without a trace of triumph or malice, laid out 60,000 years of hidden history. The Hollow, the barrier, the correction field, and the quiet, thankless vigilance humanity had maintained alone, while the rest of the galaxy told frightened stories about monsters behind an empty border. "We did not isolate ourselves out of fear of you," Ilson told the Assembly. "We isolated ourselves because the technology required to hold back true annihilation is also technology capable of causing it, in the wrong hands, under the wrong pressures. We have spent 60,000 years being the only species willing to carry that burden in silence. Commander Thrax is the first outsider in all that time to actually understand what we were protecting, and the first to risk his own life defending it." The Assembly's response fractured along lines no one predicted. Some counselors, embarrassed and frightened, doubled down on denial, insisting the entire account was elaborate deception designed to weaken Dominion resolve. But others, including several who had lost family members among the ships preserved within the correction field, still alive, still waiting to be released, began publicly demanding accountability, not from the humans, but from a government that had ordered a young commander into a firefight against a threat it never bothered to understand. Then Keswick, humiliated and demoted after his failed advance, did something Thrax never expected. He stood before the Assembly and confirmed every detail of Thrax's account, admitting that his own fleet sensors had recorded the same impossible readings before Thrax disabled his ships. "I hated him for stopping me," Keswick admitted, his voice tight with a difficult honesty. I still believe he humiliated me in front of the entire Dominion. But if he hadn't, I would have led 2,000 ships to their deaths for nothing, and possibly doomed every world I've ever sworn to protect. I would rather live with that humiliation than the alternative. As the hearing stretched into its second day, Ilson made an offer that changed the terms of the entire conversation. Humanity, she announced, was prepared to formally end the quarantine line. Not because the threat of the Hollow had lessened, but because 60,000 years of solitary vigilance had taught humanity a harder truth. No single civilization, however advanced, could carry that burden forever without eventually failing under its own weight. We are proposing something the galaxy has never seen, Ilson said. An alliance, not of conquest, not of empire, but of shared vigilance. Every civilization capable and willing to help maintain the barrier, trained and trusted with the knowledge we have guarded alone for 60,000 years. We call it the Eternal Vigil. Commander Thrax has already proven, through action rather than words, that he understands what that responsibility requires. We are asking him to be the first. The chamber erupted into chaos. Outrage from some counselors, disbelief from others, and beneath it all, the quiet, dawning realization among the Dominion citizens watching from 112 worlds that the greatest empire in galactic history had just been offered something far rarer than conquest: purpose. All eyes turned to Thrax, standing at the center of the chamber, 40 years of victories behind him, and a single choice ahead that would define everything that came after. Thrax stood in silence for a long moment before he answered, long enough that the assembly chamber, usually thick with political posturing, fell completely quiet, waiting on the words of the man who had just been offered a role no Qatari, no member of any species, had ever held. For 40 years, he finally said, I measure my worth in worlds conquered. I believed strength meant never bending, never doubting, never admitting an enemy could not be beaten by force alone. I crossed the border 50,000 years old because I refused to believe anything could stand against me. I was wrong about almost everything I built my career on, but I was not wrong about one thing. When I find something worth protecting, I do not walk away from it. Chancellor Vorin, sensing the shifting tide of public opinion and desperate to salvage his political position, made one final attempt to derail the moment, declaring that accepting humanity's offer would mean formally admitting the Dominion's military had been defeated. A humiliation, he argued. No Qatari government could survive politically. But before the Assembly could vote on the matter, a wave of transmissions began arriving from across the 112 worlds of Dominion. Not from officials, but from ordinary citizens, soldiers, and the families of crew members still preserved within the correction field, all demanding the same thing: acceptance, and the safe return of everyone still suspended in temporal stasis. Faced with a groundswell of public will he could not suppress, Vorin was forced to allow the vote to proceed. It passed by an overwhelming margin. With the Assembly's formal approval secured, Ilson activated the release sequence for every ship still held within the correction field. The Ashwind, the frozen remnants of the second and third wings, all of it. Across the system, dust clouds were formed into intact hulls. Frozen explosions resumed and then dissipated harmlessly, and 900 crew members aboard the Ashwind alone opened their eyes for what felt to them like the first time in mere seconds, though weeks had passed outside the field. Corin, Thrax's second-in-command who had led the doomed charge, stumbled onto the bridge of his restored ship, disoriented but very much alive, and immediately requested a channel to Thrax's flagship. "Commander," Corin said, still shaking, "I led men to what I thought was certain death. I was wrong to charge, but I would be lying if I said I regretted seeing what's on the other side of that field with my own eyes." Thrax allowed himself, for the first time since crossing quarantine line, something close to a genuine smile. None of us are the same men who crossed that border. Corin, that may be the only good thing to come from all of this. In the weeks that followed, the Eternal Vigil took its first true shape, not as a Dominion project, not as a human project, but as something genuinely new in galactic history. An alliance of species, trained in the careful, patient science of correction field, sworn to maintain the barrier that had held the Hollow at bay for 60,000 years. Thrax resigned his title as Supreme Commander of the Qatari Dominion and accepted a new one that carried no armies, no conquered worlds, and no political power at all. Warden of the Vigil, the first non-human ever granted stewardship over humanity's oldest and most dangerous secret. Standing beside Ilsamar at the edge of the barrier itself, staring into the impossible black horizon where the hollow waited, patient and endless, Thrax finally understood the full weight of what humanity had carried alone for so long. 60,000 years, he said quietly. You never asked for recognition, never asked for gratitude. You just kept watching generation after generation, while the rest of us told stories about monsters at your border. Someone had to, Ilson said simply. We're glad it doesn't have to be only us anymore. Far behind them, across 112 worlds and now beyond, ships bearing the new insignia of eternal vigil, a closed circle wrapped around a single unblinking eye, began training their crews in vigilance rather than conquest, in preservation rather than destruction, in the quiet, unglamorous, endless work of standing guard over something too vast and too terrible for any one species to face alone. The greatest conqueror the galaxy had ever known had crossed an ancient border seeking one final, unstoppable victory. He found something far greater than victory waiting on the other side. He found a purpose worth outliving his own legend for, and in the process, ensure that the darkness beyond the stars will remain exactly where it belonged, sealed, silent, and watched forever by more than just one civilization standing alone.